I'm the Chief Executive of VolitionRx. We're a cancer diagnostic company. First of all, we're a US company, so forward-looking statements if you have a read of all of that. I'll start with our mission, and I think that's very important when you have a very strong group of people. Our mission, and we have a very dedicated team, which our collective force is to have one shared goal, which is to put cancer and hope all in the same sentence throughout the world. I'll start with the financials. We're listed in New York Stock Exchange in New York, surprise, surprise. Currently our market cap is around 70 million, and we've got cash on hand for about 5 more quarters. Some people say, why the New York Stock Exchange, why the US? You're probably all very familiar, the healthcare market's huge. The valuations on healthcare companies, once you get to the revenue stage, are massive. One of our main comparables is a company called Exact Sciences. Their market cap is about 6 billion on a fecal test looking for blood in your stool for cancer. And the healthcare market in the US is obviously the most biggest in the world by value. So a few of the investor highlights. We're a healthcare company with a range of different blood tests under development. We believe the simple blood tests are absolutely the answer for a whole lot of reasons. The main reason is compliance. That's a word which basically means, do you do the test? It doesn't matter how cheap you are, how accurate you are. If it's something which you just don't do, then it's not going to be very good for most people. And you really need about 80% of people doing the test or more for it to be really valid. Some screening tests are extremely good. They're just very low compliance, which means it's kind of hopeless. If you don't do the test, the accuracy is very easy to work out. It's exactly 0. We have very large ongoing trials going across the world. It's extremely important to do large trials in large populations to show how your test works. And we've got some amazing partners, which I'll get through, who've been tremendously helpful. There's a tremendous thirst out there for a blood test for reasons which I'll get to. Unlike pretty much anyone else in the field also, because we're doing something very different, we have a very large active and granted portfolio of IP, which I'll get to later as well. We are doing something very different, and because of that, we have a huge intellectual property portfolio. We've started in colorectal cancer, but the platform we have, the epigenetic changes, have been shown to be different in a very wide range of cancers and other diseases. So our product highlights, we've been doing a lot of work. It's been 8 years now. Like a lot of companies, we thought we'd be finished in 5 or 6, but it's been 8. Cancer diagnostics is tricky, and it's the reason why it's such an important need and something we're really filling. But we're very close to a worldwide launch in the colorectal space, as per there. And we have very large data releases coming out over the next few quarters and all the way through next year in colorectal. And also we're undertaking with the University of Bonn Hospital a trial in all 27 major cancers. The changes we're after are very common amongst the cancers and the structures we're after. And the structures we're after, the nucleosome, which I'll get to at the end, are also very valuable in a very wide range of research. It turns out not only useful in cancer detection, but a whole very wide range of areas, including therapy monitoring, treatment selection, and also a lot of other products. The nucleosome, the changes we're after, are becoming very, very important in a wide range of fields. So I guess no surprises here. Cancer is very deadly. It kills far too many people, but it really does not have to be that way. Short of curing cancer, which is probably further away than it really should be. It's a tricky disease. The next best thing by far is finding it early and removing it. The only way of doing that, we think, is a routine blood test, which you take as part of your normal blood work, which drives you to the next process. The 5 most prevalent cancers, as you can see, the prevalence and the death rate aren't necessarily the same. Some are much bigger than others, and some cancers are actually much bigger in different areas. In Asia, where we're becoming much more active, things like stomach and esophageal cancers kill a lot more people than they do here for reasons which I can get through if anyone wants to talk later. And obviously with an aging population, it's getting much, much worse, and it will continue to get worse. We don't like to hear it, but the single biggest risk factor for every cancer is almost the same: age. The older you get, you're just much more likely to have it. It's typically for older people, and we are all getting older, so it's going to become a bigger problem for the healthcare systems and for everyone in this room and everyone on the planet. So cancer is screened differently from just about every other disease. If you look at the diseases on the left, there tend to be a blood test. On the right, it's what happens with cancer, which the problem with that, the only commonly screened for cancer is the prostate, the PSA. That's not a great test. It's just used very widely because it's like our tests under development. It's routine. Doctors tick a box, it goes off. It's not much of a hassle for them. All those other ones on the right have major problems in the way things are screened. They all tend to be looking at it in one way or the other. Fecal test, you look for blood in your stool. Scan, lung scans, biopsies, or a colonoscopy or some sort of scan. So the problem with that is it just means compliance is very, very low and accuracy is variable. Although some are very accurate, the colonoscopy is a great test. If you're of that age, you really should have one done. Problem is, a lot of people don't do it for the cost and for reasons which I'm sure are very aware to all of you. It's not the most pleasant experience, so it's a great test. But if only half the people do it, you are by definition missing half the cancers. So that's not the solution. And the fecal testing is also reasonably good. The British screening program, they look for blood in your stool. Again, about half of them end up returned non-used. So it's just not going to be the answer as well. So what's our revolutionary approach? The two most important words are routine, a blood test which is done in a normal course of procedure, a blood test which takes a lot of the other tests under development, and there are plenty, require a very large amount of blood and are expensive, so therefore and have to be done in one lab in what we call like a bat cave, has to be done very carefully and very specially. Ours are routine, which means they can be run in any lab in the world because the platform we use is ELISA, and a small amount of blood is very important as well. As I said, because it's just something which can be done as your normal blood work. When it's a huge draw, it's not going to be there. So for all those reasons, I think we have something very unique and special. So what is it? I won't get into the science too much, not being a scientist myself. We have a very large scientific team based in Belgium. Our facilities there they've done a huge amount of work now. We've moved into these facilities just over 15 months ago, the new ones we have, which are 20,000 square feet, developing this platform. So not to get too complicated, but this is your chromosome. If you unravel it, every 180 base pairs, there's one of these here, which is called a nucleosome. This is what we're after. All the circulating cell-free DNA technologies are after the DNA itself, which is here, that wraps around the nucleosomes. These are very complicated switching mechanisms. It's called epigenetic changes. These control what can be read from the DNA. There are thought to be over 1,000 structures, different structures on the nucleosome, which is what we detect. And these are different in cancer. And they've been proven to be different for about 15, 16 years in the cell, the tissue itself, which is where people currently look for cancer. Makes sense. You look for the cancer where it is. But these get deposited in the blood. You're probably also very familiar. The cancer is very dynamic. A lot of births and deaths of cells going on. When the cell dies, the body cuts up the chromatin in nucleosome-sized chunks to be reprocessed. So these end up in the blood. And that's also why the research kits are useful. If you can slow down these techniques, for example, there's a lot of drugs now which use the epigenetic changes to slow the cancer down. So what to take away from this? They're very different. They're known to be very different. They're known to be in the blood. And because there are so many of them, the changes we're after are genome-wide, which means they're all, or very large numbers of them, are altered. The vast majority of these in the blood are actually changed. So we can use a very simple platform, ELISA, which is just 2 antibodies. So it's a very low cost, easy to use platform. Some of you may be familiar with one of the other people looking for blood tests, and there is a huge number. It is considered the holy grail of medicine to find blood tests for cancer. Look for circulating DNA. DNA does not circulate in the blood as you sometimes see it as a double helix that would last a millisecond. They're just about all nucleosome bound. But they only make changes to one of the base pairs of DNA they're after. So you're looking for 1 in 20 million of the nucleosomes that we're after. What we're after. So they are looking for the needle in the haystack, which is why they're very complicated, expensive tests. They'll probably end up working particularly in late-stage cancers, but when you're after such rare events, it makes for a very complicated test and an expensive test. The markers we're after have been overlooked to a large degree, except for us, mainly because you're probably also very familiar, even those who are not in the field, the DNA has become the hot area in research. It's very important. No one would say DNA is not important, but it's by no means the only changes in what happens. So there's dozens, if not hundreds of groups looking for the DNA changes to try and find blood tests. But we think it's never going to be the ultimate solution because it's complicated, it's expensive, and will therefore not be a routine blood test. So we have a lot of different opportunities. The IP we have is very, very broad, and the different tests can be used in many different sections. Frontline screening is asymptomatic. Your only symptom is being of age, between 50 and 74 typically. Triage are used in conjunction with other tests. Because we're a low-cost ELISA test, it can be very much fit into other different testing modalities. Also as a therapy monitoring, also in symptomatic cases, if you have symptoms, you also need a blood test, but that's a different test you need because you're much more likely to be later stage. If you're bleeding rectally or have other serious problems, you're probably not in the early stages of cancer, so it's a slightly different panel of what we do. Said intellectual property is huge. We've been doing this now for 8 years, and we have just about everything we could have wanted granted, everything we've wanted granted, and we're applying for new patents all the time. And that's again very unique because we're the only ones who've ever really looked at nucleosomes. Everyone is looking at the more complicated options. We have a very, very wide portfolio, and that not just doesn't extend between colorectal cancer and all the cancers, but anything where the nucleosomes are deposited in the blood, which is any inflammatory diseases. We've also looked at things like endometriosis and a lot of other diseases, so it's huge. But being a small company, I think you're all probably very aware too, it's best to get one product out the door, not try and grab 4 or 5, where we can really help one group of people very quickly and then broaden it. And as we work through the 27 cancers, we expect data later this year. We'll also start licensing it out to a few other groups who are specialists in that field. For example, on the earnings call we just had last couple of weeks, there's a lot of veterinary applications possible as well. For example, dogs, we found nucleosomes in the blood of dogs with cancer. Something most people don't realise, but our DNA and our nucleosomes are extremely similar between species as well. So, and veterinary applications are, dogs have the same disease as we do, particularly cancer, and people spend a lot on their best friend, and it's a market we could really help the veterinary area as well as all the cancers. But we're being very careful to focus on the first products to get them out the door, and then we'll license from our very strong IP portfolio, even beyond our research kits. As I said, we're focused on colorectal cancer, all too deadly, all too common, and it's absolutely one of the most curable diseases. If you're found in stage 1 and have a resection, you normally have about a 95% chance of living at least 5 years, 5 year plus, so 5 years to 20. If you're found in late stage cancer, your prognosis is really not very good. It's almost inverse. You have a 5 or 10% chance of living 5 years. And those of us who know anyone who's had late stage colorectal cancer, it's not a nice few years you have. So it's very preventable if you find it early and have it removed. And we think we want to be a very important part of the package offered to people for diagnosing in colorectal and a range of other cancers. So again, participation, compliance. Compliance is a very large part of what's important to have. Some of the other modalities we talked about are actually quite good. Some are terrible in different cancers, but their participation typically. Colorectal has one of the highest participation rates of all because of the national screening programs. But again, 62% is still far, far too low. You're missing out 38% of people right off the bat, which is a real tragedy and really does not have to be that way. So as we talked about, we believe that actually the company which raised a lot of money for the other modalities called Grail, they raised $1 billion in the seed round, so I guess they can call themselves Grail. If you look at all the different areas, the blood test is superior. Very easy to use, very low risk to the patient, very convenient. Our blood tests cost just a few dollars to make per assay. We put 4 or 5 together, so we can make a lot of money in the European system as well as the US. And we aim to help in the developing world as well. And we're looking to launch product in countries like India and China as well, because given in colorectal space, for example, given their lifestyles are becoming more like ours, colorectal is becoming more of a problem for them. And they do have a range of different cancers. We're looking to do some large trials in Asia and things like esophageal and stomach cancer as well, so they can help us drive back from them. And as I said, compliance. Compliance with a routine blood test is 100% of people who do a routine blood test, which the vast majority of people will do. So does it work? Doesn't matter being all those things if you can't detect the cancer. We've done some large trials. We've got very big readouts later this year. We've been detecting around 80% of cancers, and very importantly, this is the stage 1 cancers and high-risk adenoma, which are the polyps in your stomach, which are most likely to become cancer. About 20% of people in the screening age to have some sort of polyps or even more. It comes down to, are they going to become the cancer? So the high-risk polyps. So I guess, think of it this way. All cancers start as a polyp, but most polyps don't become cancer. So you want to find which are the high-risk ones to make sure you really get them. We've also done smaller trials with a range of different groups and had excellent results in a range of cancers. We're now moving to some of the bigger trials with other collaborators in those cancers. And as I said, the 27 cancer study. I think uniquely for a small company, we're just over 40 people. We have some amazing partnerships worldwide with groups who've been collecting for us, whose specialty is collecting samples and running the trials. If we were to pay for the full cost of these trials, it would be many times our market cap, even at 70 million. So, a lot of that is they're all desperate for a blood test. Everyone realised the blood test has to be the solution. And also we just need a small amount of the blood needed. If we needed 5 or 10 mils of blood like everybody else, I'm sure they wouldn't be generous with their entire collection. But as you can see, there's over 100,000 samples there in trials worldwide. And we couldn't be happier or prouder of the people who've been working with us. And if we succeed, as we aim to do, it'll be a very large part to the generosity of these large facilities worldwide. So as I said, there's some big milestones coming up. The launch of products in Europe, the US, and Asia, as we roll out the colorectal and the other cancers, as well as the big data points coming up. We have a strategy. We've got a very large trial going on in the US with the Early Detection Research Network, again, costing us very little. 13,500 patients. People say, why go so large? Just it comes to simple mathematics. In the States, you need a representative population. So cancer is usually about 0.3, 0.4% of the population. So you need about 50 cancers to be statistically valid. So you have 13,500 people, works out about 50 cancers. And you need to have that kind of trial to be taken seriously. And we have very large trials like that going in Europe and just about in Asia with the Taiwanese and Singaporeans. So as I said, we've also launched a range of research kits to, we launched the first one, we're launching a range. As we come up with each one of the targets for the final version of our assays, we'll launch them as a research product. We've just launched the first one, and that's useful in a very wide range of areas. Not a huge source of revenue. They sell for less than $1,000 per kit. You probably end up selling a few hundred or a few thousand a year. The main thing with that is you're getting a whole lot of groups who are using your technology. What we give them for this is a research license. We could try and do it all ourselves, but we want to get the platform as widely used as quickly as possible to help as many people as possible. And then if they do come up with something important for a drug, for example, then they've got to come back for a product license, which is a whole different discussion. But we want to make sure the tests are not only used as widely in cancer as possible, but for all the other uses which they can. And the structures we're after are becoming a very much more researched area now, and it's all really picking up. So as I talked about, the trials worldwide, huge and coming up over the next 12 months. The corporate, as I discussed at the start. I'll be quick, references, everything we said, back up for it. And the team has done a huge amount of work. When you're doing something very different, it takes time, particularly when you're developing the whole space ourselves. Our scientific team in Belgium, headed up by Catan, Dr. Michel, has done an amazing job in really bringing this to fruition. We've had to go through a lot of things. When you're developing a whole new platform, there's a lot of things you've got to think about. The team's done an amazing job of getting there. Just a quick example, the controls, which is the calibrant for the assays, in the last year there's become available a recombinant nucleosome, which is a fancy way of saying an artificial. They put together 8 proteins and some DNA, and then you attach whatever structure you're after to it, and it means we have a perfect calibrant, because whatever we're detecting has to be that, because that's the only thing on the nucleosome. So it's been remarkable. It's meant we've had to recalibrate our trials and get things, but it means we have a much more robust, reproducible test than we could possibly have had. So it's really on the cutting edge. It's incredibly cool what's been done now in epigenetics, and we really are at the front edge of it all. And Dr. Quay has put together our trials in Asia, has done a tremendous job. And Jason, Dr. Trell, has done a huge job in the US in lining up these massive, almost free trials. Just an example, the Early Detection Research Network, 13,500 samples. Typically, that'd be $3,000 to $5,000 a sample if you're paying for it. So that's about a market cap. We got it for just a few $1 million from the American Cancer Group, because they're desperate for a blood test, because it really has to be a blood test, and it has to be soon, because all too many people are dying. That's our facility. We had purpose-built. We've also had tremendous support from the Belgian region we're at. Can't quite see it all, but there's 20,000 square foot of lab, a brand new building we paid 1.2 million euros for, which they gave us on a very long, very attractive mortgage rate, and a large grant from the regional government there. So it's been a fantastic facility. There's about 23 people working there now, really making this dream a reality. And it's, we couldn't have been happier in the Belgian region. If you were to have that in Cambridge here or in the US, it'd cost you about what we paid for it in rent per year. So we've managed to keep the cost. We only burn $1 million a month doing all those trials, which is really quite different. Anyway, that's Volition. I'll have some time for questions.
Questions? Oh, a few hands have gone up. Take this one first, just this gentleman here.
If the 27 most prevalent cancer trial
Yes.
is successful, how does the company intend to proceed there?
Yeah, very good question. So obviously we've focused on one product ourselves, the colorectal range, because that's something we've had very large trials in. So whatever the cancers are, if assuming there are good data from them, and we'd expect that from the trials we've had before. For example, ovarian, we've been speaking to some groups in the States who have products in that space, who have samples and can launch quickly. So we'd look to license it to different groups, also in Asia and the US and Europe. As much as we can, we'd keep it as virtual as we can. So the basic aim is to find out which cancers work very well, work out what to do ourselves, and everything else we'll license out. We don't want to become a massive company with a massive sales force in 20 different things. We can add the most value, we think, by discovering, showing it works, and then working with groups who can really, and it's the quickest way to market as well, to make sure that they can really do things as quick as possible.
The concept of a single blood test that would determine what cancer you've got, that's not really a viable option at this stage.
I think there's probably markers which you can tell between a few cancers. The problem is it probably, regulatory-wise, is difficult. If we were to say, we think you might have cancer, we're not quite sure where it is. Can lead to as many problems, as many follow-up tests. So the feedback was a very good question, something we've done a lot of thinking about. The feedback we've got is diagnose each cancer by each cancer. And if you look at the top 3 or 4 in prevalence, it's about 70% of the cancers. So that's really what you've got to conquer. But I think it would be extremely hard to get a cancer test for a range of cancers approved. We're going to be going cancer by cancer, and that's where we can add the most value. Thank you.
Gentleman just down here.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
When you're using or creating a general test for large populations, the false positive matters as much as the false negative.
Yes.
So you've presented the false negative stats. Do you know what the false positives
Yeah,
are?
so they're both on there. But it depends on, it's a ROC curve, so you can actually push one for the other, more false positives for negatives, because there's 2 bell curves. But for the market in the US, they're much more concerned with getting the cancers because of liability. And as you say, in Europe, they're very concerned about false positives, because then you have to have a lot of colonoscopies and follow-up. But typically, the blood tests, if you look at where the blood tests are, currently the PSA is somewhere around 70. We're getting around 80, particularly in the early stage cancers. The perfect test would be the colonoscopy is about 90, 95. So I don't think we're going to be as accurate as the colonoscopy for a while, because when you have a camera, it's very accurate. I won't go into the graphics of it all, but so our aim is to launch something at least around the 80% range for both ways, to make sure that we generate the proper.
And you sort of said it's tunable. Is that, is that just interpretation of the results, or is that you do something different with the test to make it tunable, balancing the false positive?
A bit of both. So when you have a range of different assays in a panel, you can sacrifice sensitivity for specificity, or the other way around, or you can make it more precise for early or late stage cancers. They have a different profile. Or you can have a larger or smaller panel depending on the market. Some markets are very price sensitive. Some, like the United States, really don't mind. It's a couple of percentage of extra accuracy, and they don't mind it doubling or tripling. So it's a very flexible platform for all those ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman at the very back.
As an investor,
Hi.
how do I not be an emotional investor with you? How do I get my money back? I tell you, because my experience with a lot of these drug companies or companies like yours is that you can get really whacked in your share price if a product doesn't work. You might just lose 70% just overnight. So how do I protect my money even if I don't get it back? How am I not investing in a charity, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, very good question. We're not actually, we're not just a charity. We're all here to make money for the shareholders, absolutely. When we're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, where our plans are to help as many people as possible. But I think they're both actually tied together. If we launch very good products, which are viable very many places in the world, the upside is huge. Now, when you're in a small company without pre-revenue in the way we are, it's much more risky. Obviously, if you want a low return, Abbott or Pfizer are probably less a risk when you have dozens of products. But if you look just purely from the investment point of view, the upside potential is massive. As I mentioned, Exact Sciences have launched one fecal test, which is only saleable in the US, looking for one type of cancer, and they're a $6.5 billion market cap company, losing a lot per quarter. So if we get it right, and we think we will, the upside is huge. But anyone who tells you from a small company it's guaranteed to get a massive upswing is fooling themselves. So of course, in any small company, there's a risk, and we are pre-revenue. I wouldn't recommend you put 90% of your portfolio into VolitionRx. I think we'll make it. I think we'll be tremendously successful. But we're not just a charity. We are very serious people wanting to make money for our investors. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can help a tremendous amount of people who are doing the right thing. And I think that's hopefully where we'll get to. And ultimately, the market is every adult on the planet who can afford a $10, $15 blood test. So we can help a lot of people, make a lot of money. And yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Thanks.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.